welcome to another weekly edit. Something a little bit different this week. We've had predominantly landscape shots in the last weekly edit. So this week we've got a bit of a nature shot. So a bit of fungi. So after Storm Goretti in the local playground, we had 3 dead trees come down in the storm. Council have come along, just chopped them up out of the way and stuck them on the side, and some fungi sprouted. So on my dog walk, I managed to get a shot just taken on the phone. So here is the shot in Lightroom Classic. So yeah, taken on the phone. I do use RAW on the phone, so it's an Apple RAW format. And yeah, we're just going to do an edit. Pretty straightforward, hopefully. So as ever, I'm going to apply the lens corrections. Make a very small difference with the phone, but they do make a little bit of a difference. And then, as usual, going to go top to bottom, just working my way through. So exposure-wise, not too bad. In terms of the photograph, it's kind of unfortunate. I do like this tree leaning in here and these branches filling this background up the top here, but on this side it's a little bit dead. So we're going to deal with that slightly with a crop. Other than that, I mean, there's not a lot I can do about this area, unfortunately. In terms of the exposure, it's if I turn the clip-ins on, we've got nothing that's gone completely black. We've got a little bit of clipping on the highlights up the top here. So I will pull down the highlights slightly, but being a phone shot, the dynamic range is nowhere near as good as like a full frame camera or an APS-C camera, because the sensor is so small and the pixels are so tightly packed together. So there isn't a huge amount of latitude that we can get out of the file. So I have to be careful with the highlights, because you see, even just a little bit, if I go to the extreme, what you see is white suddenly become like grey. It kind of looks horrible, to be honest. So I'm going to pull them down a little bit, but very, very small amount. I mean, we can see from the histogram that actually the exposure's pretty good. We've just unfortunately in this shot, we've just got a bit of a dead area up the top left here. As I say, if we had the same as we've got on the right hand side on the left with some branches creeping, I think it'd make a better shot. But that's what we've got, so that's what we're going to deal with. I mean, at the time, I liked the idea of this sort of branch reaching up into the sky, seeing the underside of the fungi for a change, all these gills, quite interesting in this repeating pattern going up. And you've even got some up here, extending up here. So, yeah, for a phone shot, I'm quite pleased with it. So, going to lift the shadows. Again, not going to overdo it, because it just starts to look a bit odd. So somewhere around there. Again, if we sort of backslash before and after, by doing what we've done with the highlights and the shadows, we have lost a bit of contrast. So I am going to introduce a bit of contrast, not too much. Going to introduce a little bit of texture and a little bit of clarity. Or I didn't even move the clarity there. Sort of my mind told me I moved it, and reset it back to 0. There you go. So not a huge change. Before we go any further, I am going to look at the crop. So as I say, this side I don't think is particularly adding to the shot. So I am going to crop it in, and I might play with the type of crop that we've got in terms of the ratio. So at the moment it's on original, which is like a 4:3 on the iPhone. Let's have a look at what a square looks like. What do you think of that? Yeah, don't mind that. Let's just apply that. We might tweak with it a little bit. No, yeah, I'm quite happy with that. It's eliminated some of this area in the top left. We've kept some breathing space around here. We've still got these elements coming in. So yeah, quite pleased with that. So next, let's have a look at the colour. I'm going to add a little bit of saturation, not too much. something like that. And then with the color mixer, I'm going to look at the luminance on the blues. We might be able to pull some sort of color back in, more so in the sky luminance on the blues. Yeah, there we go. Again, going to be careful, don't go too far because it starts to look a little odd. But I quite like that orange versus the blue. I think that kind of works. Going to go back a little bit because it's interesting, like looking at the camera, going back to the screen, just moving away briefly for a moment, it just looked odd. So it's worth doing that sometimes, just coming away from an image and going back, and it does look, different. Let's have a look at what happens if we sort of mess with the oranges and stuff in the luminance. Might raise it a little bit. I'm just conscious on these edges are very bright, but they're top lit, even with it being kind of overcast. So yeah, I'm careful I don't push those too much. Right, next I'm going to go into remove tool. I am not happy with this bit here. It's okay, it's small, but it's just kind of distracting. So with the remove tool, I am going to just try and get rid of it. Not using any, shouldn't be using any, generative AI is turned off. I try not to use it unless I really have to. I certainly wouldn't use it for images that I'm kind of entering into competitions or anything like that. So remove tool can be hit and miss. Sometimes it's amazing, other times it's like, it didn't quite work, and then I'll flip between healing or the clone tool. So let's just go down over that there and see what it does. Yeah, pretty good. Yeah, happy with that. So we've not had to use any generative AI or anything like that. We're just using the remove tool. So yeah, I'm quite happy with that. Let's come out of that now. And back to a fit. So if I go before and after, you can see that's where we started. And that's where we are now. It's not a huge, change from the original file. Obviously, being taken on the phone, there is an element of processing that the phone has done. So it's out of the camera. It's quite punchy anyway. So yeah, quite pleased with that. And just getting rid of that distraction, I do think it helps. Again, I'm not massively happy with this top corner, but it is what it is. But yeah, I think the rest of the shot works quite well. Just going to go into the masks, take a radial, and I'm just going to see if we can lift this area a little bit. It might not work, might sort of do away with it, but it's worth having a look. Obviously, being the fact that I'm literally with the phone was literally, like that, shooting up. So this area that we're now looking at with this radial mask is obviously in deep shadow. So let's see what we can do in terms of lifting it. Maybe just a little bit. Again, I don't want to overdo it. Yeah, just a touch. And then it might not surprise you that I'm going to look at a radial for a vignette. Having said that, I've got to be careful that top left-hand corner. What might just happen is it just ends up looking a little bit kind of muddy. So Option X, no. Option apostrophe to invert the mask. It's a bit big at the minute. Sort it out. There we go. In fact, if I delete that a minute, a little tip with a radial mask, especially when you've got a square crop, I believe if you hold Option and then do your radial mask, is a perfect circle. So all I'm doing is holding Option. That gives me a perfect circle. Quite handy for a square crop. So Option and apostrophe to invert it. And it's just, again, the only areas that we're affecting are these reddish areas. Like that. Zoom in a little bit. And let's just pull the exposure down. And yeah, got to be a little bit careful of this top corner. I kind of like what it's doing down here and up here because it is just contained in the eye. We just have to be a little bit careful here because it has a tendency to make it a little, as I say, look a little bit on the muddy side. with those whites. So yeah, stick with that there, I think. Go back to the fit. So again, just before and after. So yeah, I'm pleased with that. The last thing really to do is just a little bit of sharpening. So this is the main focal point. So this is going to be the area I'm looking at in terms of sharpening, and they're quite sharp out of camera. So in previous videos when I've been shooting with like the Canon 5D, I've been pushing it to like 80 on the sharpener. I don't think I need to go as far with the phone shot here. So somewhere around there. Hold the Option key down on the masking. Don't want to sharpen any of the sky, so want that mask to go nice and black. Yeah, around there somewhere. So yeah, finished. Quite a simple edit, I think, this week. Again, usual routine. I'll put before and after up. Let me know what you think. I'll stick the shot up on Instagram as well. So thanks for watching. Till next time, take care. Goodbye.